You'll be safer in a nursing home, Margaret. My daughter-in-law said it so calmly, as if she were suggesting a weekend getaway instead of erasing me from my own life. I remember the way the afternoon light fell across the dining table, the same oak table my husband and I had picked out 32 years ago, back when everything we built felt permanent. My son, Daniel, sat beside her, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his eyes fixed somewhere just past my shoulder, as if I were already fading from the room. He didn't argue. He didn't question her. He simply nodded, once, slow and quiet, like a man agreeing to something practical. I smiled, not because I agreed, and not because I was confused, but because in that exact moment, something inside me became very still. People think silence means weakness. They think a woman my age, a widow, someone who has just buried her husband of 40 years, is too fragile to fight back. They mistake grief for surrender. They mistake patience for helplessness. What they didn't understand was that I had spent a lifetime watching, listening, learning when to speak, and when to let others reveal themselves. And in that moment, Ashley revealed everything. It had only been 3 weeks since my husband, Thomas, passed away. 3 weeks since I stood beside his grave, the wind cutting through my black coat, while neighbors whispered condolences that felt rehearsed and distant. 3 weeks since this house, our house, began to feel unfamiliar, not because of his absence, but because of the quiet shift in how I was treated within it. Ashley had started small. She reorganized the kitchen without asking. She moved my things, just inches at first, then entire drawers. She began speaking about practical decisions and long-term plans, always with that careful, measured tone that sounded polite on the surface but carried something colder underneath. Daniel, my son who once called me every Sunday without fail, had become quieter, shorter in his responses, always glancing at Ashley before answering me, as if checking for approval. I noticed these things. I always notice. But I said nothing. Not yet. And then came that afternoon. The sentence. The plan, delivered as if it had already been decided. A nursing home. Not a suggestion. Not a conversation. A conclusion. I folded my hands in my lap and tilted my head slightly, studying her face the way I used to study contracts when Thomas and I were first building our life together, looking for the clause that didn't belong. Is that so? I asked, my voice steady, almost gentle. Ashley smiled, relieved perhaps that I wasn't making a scene. It's for the best, she said. Of course it was. For her. For them. For whatever they had already set in motion behind closed doors, in conversations I was no longer invited to. I glanced at Daniel then, giving him one last chance to be the son I raised. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, but the words never came. And that told me everything I needed to know. So I nodded. Slowly. Gracefully. If that's what you think is best, I said. And I meant it. Because sometimes, the best way to understand how far someone is willing to go is to let them believe you're already out of the way. The next morning, the house felt quieter than it had any right to be, as if it already knew I was being slowly written out of it. I woke up at exactly 6:30, the same time I had for decades, even though there was no one left to make coffee for except myself. The kitchen was spotless, but not in the way I liked. It was Ashley's version of clean, everything arranged for appearance rather than memory. The ceramic mug Thomas used every morning was no longer on the counter where he had always left it. Instead, it had been moved to a cabinet I rarely opened, tucked behind newer, matching sets that looked like they belonged in a catalog rather than a home. I noticed that, and I said nothing. I brewed my coffee, measured 2 tablespoons exactly the way Thomas liked it, even though I drank it black. Habit is a strange thing. It keeps people grounded when everything else begins to shift. Around 7:15, I heard footsteps upstairs. Ashley was always precise with her timing. She came down dressed for the day, even though she had nowhere urgent to be. Her hair was perfectly styled, her expression composed, like someone preparing for a meeting rather than breakfast. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. I looked up from my cup and gave her a small nod. "Good morning." Daniel followed a few minutes later, slower, less certain. He avoided looking directly at me, choosing instead to focus on his phone as he sat down. That was new. My son had never been a man who hid behind screens, not until recently. "I made eggs," Ashley said, placing a plate in front of him but not offering one to me. It was a small thing, the kind of thing most people would overlook. But patterns are built from small things, and I had learned long ago that patterns reveal intention. I finished my coffee and stood, rinsing my cup and placing it carefully in the sink. I have an appointment later, Ashley continued, glancing at Daniel as she spoke, as if reminding him of something already discussed. We should talk about the timeline. The timeline. Such an efficient word for something that was meant to dismantle a life. Daniel nodded again, still not meeting my eyes. Right. The timeline. I turned slightly, leaning against the counter, allowing myself to observe them without interruption. What timeline would that be? I asked, keeping my tone light, almost curious. Ashley did not hesitate. Transitioning you into a place that can provide more support. There it was again, dressed in polite language, carefully wrapped to sound reasonable. I tilted my head, as if considering it for the first time. And how long do you think that will take? 2 weeks, she said. Not a suggestion, a decision. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable, then nodded once. That sounds very organized. Ashley smiled, clearly interpreting my response as agreement. People often hear what they want to hear. We have already started looking at facilities, she added. There is one about 15 miles from here. Very reputable. Structured activities. Medical staff on site. 15 miles. Close enough to ease their conscience. Far enough to remove me from daily life. I walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the backyard Thomas had spent years maintaining. The rose bushes were beginning to bloom, just as they did every spring, unaware that everything else was being rearranged. That is thoughtful of you, I said quietly. And it was, in a way. Thoughtful planning requires effort. Effort reveals intention. And intention, when examined closely, always leaves evidence. I turned back to face them, offering a small, measured smile. If we are going to do this properly, I would like to review everything first. Ashley's eyes flickered, just for a moment. There it was. The first crack. Of course, she said quickly. We will go over all the details. Daniel finally looked up then, his expression uncertain, as if something in my tone had unsettled him. But he said nothing. He never did anymore. I folded my hands in front of me, calm, composed, exactly as they expected. Because the truth was, I was not resisting their plan. Not yet. I was simply allowing it to unfold, piece by piece, until every hidden part of it stood clearly in the light. By the third day, the house no longer felt like a place I lived in, but rather a place I was being phased out of with quiet efficiency. It was not anything dramatic, nothing that could be pointed to as cruel in a single moment, but a series of small adjustments that, when placed together, formed a very clear direction. My closet had been reorganized. Not cleaned, not tidied, but reduced. Certain dresses were missing, replaced by neatly folded stacks of clothing I had not worn in years. Boxes had appeared in the corner, labeled in Ashley's careful handwriting. Seasonal. Donate. Storage. I stood there for a long moment, running my fingers along the edge of one of the boxes, noticing how light it was. It is a strange feeling, realizing someone else has already decided what parts of your life are worth keeping. I closed the closet door gently and walked downstairs. Ashley was at the dining table with her laptop open, a stack of papers arranged beside her in perfect alignment. She looked up when she heard me, her expression warm, almost welcoming. I was just about to come find you, she said. I have some information for you to review. Of course she did. I took a seat across from her, folding my hands neatly in my lap, the same way I had done at countless meetings beside Thomas when we were younger. Back then, people underestimated me too. It never ended well for them. Ashley slid a folder across the table toward me. These are the options we discussed, she explained. Each facility offers different levels of care, but this one is the best fit. I opened the folder slowly, taking my time, allowing her to believe. I was overwhelmed rather than attentive. Inside were brochures, photographs of bright rooms filled with sunlight, smiling older women playing cards, walking in gardens, sitting in common areas designed to look like living rooms, but lacking the quiet imperfections of a real home. There was a schedule printed neatly on the second page. Breakfast at 7. Activities at 9. Lunch at noon. Structure, control, predictability. A life reduced to time slots. It looks very organized, I said, my voice even. Ashley nodded, pleased. That is important at this stage. At this stage. I let that phrase settle between us before turning another page. That was when I saw it. A document clipped to the back of the folder, partially hidden beneath the brochures. It was not meant to stand out, but it did. Legal formatting has a certain rhythm to it, a structure you recognize once you have seen enough of it. I had seen plenty. I slid the paper free, my eyes scanning the lines without rushing. Authorization. Transfer of residence. Financial oversight. There it was, written clearly, without decoration. A plan not just to move me, but to control what came next. I felt something shift inside me then. Not shock, not anger, but clarity. This was not about concern. This was about access. About control. About removing me from the equation so that everything else could be handled without interruption. I placed the paper back into the folder exactly as I had found it and looked up at Ashley. She was watching me carefully now, searching my face for signs of resistance. I gave her none. Instead, I offered a small, thoughtful smile. "You have put a lot of work into this," I said. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "We just want what is best for you." Of course they did. I closed the folder gently and rested my hands on top of it. "I will need a little time to go through everything," I added. "Properly." Ashley nodded quickly. "Take all the time you need." That was generous of her, considering she had already set the timeline. I stood up slowly, carrying the folder with me as I walked toward the stairs. Each step felt measured, deliberate, as if I were walking into a role I had not played in years but still remembered perfectly. Because the truth was, I had seen enough. Not everything, not yet, but enough to understand the direction of their plan. And once you understand the direction, the rest is simply a matter of patience. I paused at the top of the stairs and glanced back for just a second. Ashley had already returned to her laptop, her attention shifting away from me as if I were no longer something that required close monitoring. That was her first mistake. I turned and continued down the hallway, closing the bedroom door behind me with a soft, quiet click. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, placed the folder beside me, and allowed myself a single, steady breath. They believed this was already decided. They believed I was already leaving. And for now, I was going to let them believe exactly that. That night, I did not turn on the television, and I did not call anyone, even though there were people I could have reached out to if I wanted comfort or advice. Instead, I sat in the quiet of my bedroom with the folder resting beside me, the lamp casting a soft circle of light across the pages I had already memorized. I did not need to read them again to understand what they meant. What mattered was not what was written, but what had been left unsaid. That is where the truth usually lives. I leaned back slightly, letting my eyes drift across the room, taking in the details I had once overlooked because they had always been there. The dresser Thomas built with his own hands. The framed photograph from our trip to Vermont, where the leaves had turned the most brilliant shade of red I had ever seen. The small imperfections in the wood floor near the window where years of sunlight had worn the finish just enough to reveal time itself. This room was not just a space. It was evidence. Evidence of a life built deliberately, patiently, piece by piece. And now, someone else had decided it could be packed into boxes labeled with neat handwriting and moved out of sight. I rested my hands on my lap and closed my eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to remember. Thomas had never rushed decisions. That was one of the first things I learned about him. Even when we were young and everything felt urgent, he would pause, consider, ask questions no one else thought to ask. He used to say that the right answer is rarely the one offered first. It is the one you uncover when you take the time to look beyond what is presented. I opened my eyes and reached for the folder again, this time focusing not on the obvious documents, but on the smaller details. The formatting, the order of the pages, the dates. That was where things began to separate. The timeline Ashley had presented did not align with the preparation reflected in the paperwork. Some of these documents had been drafted earlier than she had implied. Not days earlier. Weeks. Possibly longer. That meant this was not a reaction to my husband's passing. It was a plan that had been forming while he was still alive. I let that realization settle slowly, not allowing it to rush into anger. Anger clouds judgment, and I could not afford that. Not now. I turned to the final page again, the one detailing financial oversight, and traced the language carefully in my mind. It was written in a way that suggested temporary assistance, but the structure allowed for permanence if certain conditions were met. Conditions that could easily be interpreted, adjusted, or extended depending on who held control. It was subtle, well constructed, designed to appear helpful while quietly transferring authority. I placed the folder down and stood, walking toward the window. The night outside was still, the kind of stillness that makes even small sounds feel deliberate. I watched the reflection of the room in the glass, noticing how everything appeared intact, unchanged, as if nothing had shifted at all. That was the illusion they were relying on, that I would accept the surface explanation without examining what lay beneath it. I turned away from the window and walked to the dresser, opening the top drawer where I kept the few things I never needed to look for because I always knew exactly where they were. Inside, beneath a stack of neatly folded scarves, was a small envelope Thomas had placed there years ago. He had told me about it once, casually, as if it were not important, which was exactly how he handled the things that mattered most. I picked it up and held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, the quiet certainty it represented. Thomas had trusted me to see what others might miss. He had trusted me to act when the time came. And now it had. I returned to the bed and sat down again, placing the envelope beside the folder. 2 sets of documents. 2 versions of what the future could look like. One carefully presented, the other quietly prepared. I looked at them both for a long moment, then allowed myself a small, controlled smile. They believed they had already arranged everything. They believed the outcome was inevitable. But they had only prepared for the version of me they thought I was, not the one I had always been. I did not open the envelope right away. Some things are not meant to be rushed, especially when you already understand their weight. Instead, I placed it back into the drawer and closed it carefully, as if nothing had changed. Because for now, nothing needed to appear different. The next morning, I followed the same routine. 6:30. Coffee. 2 tablespoons, measured without thinking. The house was quiet again, but this time, I listened more closely. Every sound had meaning when you knew where to place your attention. At 7:20, Ashley's footsteps descended the stairs, steady and controlled. Daniel followed a few minutes later, slower as always, as if he were still deciding which version of himself to be each morning. I remained at the kitchen counter, my back partially turned, giving them the impression that I was simply continuing my usual habits. I was thinking, Ashley began, her tone light, almost conversational. We should schedule a visit to the facility tomorrow. It would help make everything feel more real. More real. That was an interesting choice of words. I turned slightly, holding my cup with both hands, and nodded. That sounds reasonable, I said. Daniel glanced at me then, just briefly, as if he expected hesitation, or resistance, or something that would give him an excuse to reconsider. When he found none, he looked back down again. That was the moment I understood something important. He was not leading this. He was following. And people who follow are often the easiest to redirect, once you know where their loyalty truly lies. Ashley continued speaking, outlining details about appointments, transportation, and timing, each word reinforcing the structure she had already built in her mind. I listened without interruption, allowing her to feel in control, allowing her to believe that her plan was moving forward exactly as intended. Because the more confident she became, the less careful she would be. After breakfast, Daniel left for work, offering a quick, distracted goodbye that did not quite reach his eyes. Ashley remained behind, gathering her papers, organizing them into neat stacks before placing them into her bag. I will confirm everything this afternoon, she said. We are on a tight schedule. I nodded again. Of course. She paused for a moment, studying me, perhaps searching for something she could not quite define. Then she smiled, satisfied, and turned to leave. The front door closed softly behind her, and the house returned to its familiar silence. That was when I moved. Not quickly, not urgently, but with purpose. I walked upstairs, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope once more. This time, I did not hesitate. Inside was a single folded document, aged slightly at the edges, but preserved with care. I opened it slowly, my eyes scanning the words I had only heard about once, years ago, in a conversation that seemed casual at the time, but now revealed its true intention. Thomas had always been thorough. He believed in preparation, in clarity, in ensuring that what mattered would not be left to interpretation. The document reflected that. It outlined protections, conditions, authority that did not disappear simply because someone else assumed control. It was not loud. It did not announce itself. But it was precise, and precision is what wins in situations like this. I folded the paper again and held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the quiet reassurance it provided. They had their version of the future, carefully constructed, neatly presented. And now I had mine. I placed the document into my purse, not hidden, but not visible either, exactly where it needed to be. Then I closed the drawer, adjusted the scarf on top, and stepped back into the hallway. From the outside, nothing had changed. The same house, the same routine, the same quiet widow moving through her day without resistance. But inside, everything had shifted, because now, I was no longer observing their plan. I was preparing mine. The following day unfolded exactly as Ashley had planned, which was precisely why I did not interfere with it. At 9 in the morning, she reminded me about the visit, her tone bright, almost encouraging, as if she were guiding me towards something beneficial rather than final. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress and a light cardigan, the kind of outfit that made me appear smaller, less assertive, the version of myself they seemed most comfortable with. Appearances matter. They shape expectations, and expectations create openings. When we got into the car, Ashley took the driver's seat without asking, adjusting the mirrors with practiced familiarity. Daniel sat beside her, glancing back at me once before turning forward again. The drive took just under 20 minutes, long enough for silence to settle, but not long enough for conversation to feel necessary. I watched the passing streets, noting how quickly familiar surroundings gave way to quieter, less personal spaces, places designed for function rather than belonging. When we arrived, the building stood exactly as described in the brochure. Clean lines, large windows, neutral colors, everything in its place. It looked respectable, which is often the most effective disguise. Ashley guided me inside with a gentle hand at my elbow, a gesture that might have appeared caring to anyone watching, but felt more like direction than support. A woman at the front desk greeted us with a professional smile, her tone warm but measured, as if she had delivered the same welcome 100 times before. "You must be Margaret," she said. "We have been expecting you." Of course they had. Ashley had made sure of that. We were led through a series of rooms, each one carefully arranged to demonstrate comfort and routine. A common area where a small group of residents sat in a circle, engaged in a quiet activity that resembled conversation more than connection. A dining space where tables were set in identical patterns, each place indistinguishable from the next. A hallway lined with doors, each one closed, each one holding a life that had been reduced to a contained space. I walked slowly, taking everything in without comment. Ashley spoke when necessary, asking questions about schedules, care options, and availability, her voice confident, assured, as if she were finalizing a decision rather than exploring one. Daniel remained mostly silent, his presence more symbolic than active. At one point, the staff member turned to me directly. "How does this feel to you?" she asked kindly. I paused, just long enough to make the question meaningful. "It feels very organized," I replied. The answer satisfied her. It satisfied Ashley even more. We were shown a room next, already prepared, as if waiting for occupancy. A bed positioned neatly against the wall, a small dresser, a window that looked out onto a carefully maintained lawn. It was pleasant, controlled, complete in its simplicity. Ashley stepped inside first, scanning the space with approval. "This would be perfect," she said. "Perfect." I stepped into the doorway but did not fully enter. Instead, I remained just inside the frame, observing rather than accepting. "It certainly has everything it needs," I said. That was true. Everything it needed. Nothing it could not replace. Ashley turned toward me, her expression bright. "We can start the paperwork this afternoon if you are comfortable." I met her gaze, calm, steady, exactly as she expected. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said softly. "I think that would be best." Daniel looked at me again then, longer this time, as if searching for something he could not quite identify. Perhaps he was waiting for hesitation, for doubt, for a reason to pause. But I gave him none, because the truth was, I was not agreeing to their plan. I was allowing it to move forward. And there is a difference between the two, one that only becomes clear when it is far too late to undo what has already been set in motion. The paperwork appointment was scheduled for the following afternoon, and Ashley made sure everything was arranged down to the smallest detail. She confirmed the time twice, printed additional copies of documents that were already prepared, and placed them neatly into her leather folder, as if she were presenting a finalized deal. Daniel came home early that day, which in itself was unusual. He walked through the door just after 3, his tie slightly loosened, his expression harder to read than before. He greeted Ashley first, then glanced in my direction with something that resembled hesitation. "Everything set?" he asked. Ashley nodded, her confidence unwavering. "Everything is ready. We just need signatures." Just signatures. It is always presented that way, as if a signature is a small formality rather than the moment everything changes. I was sitting in the living room when they arrived, the folder resting on the table in front of me, exactly where I had left it earlier. I had not moved it. I wanted them to see that. I had not hidden anything, had not questioned anything, had not resisted. Perception matters. Ashley walked in first, her heels making soft, deliberate sounds against the floor. Daniel followed, quieter, watching. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm, almost encouraging. I looked up at her and gave a small nod. Yes. That was all she needed. We left the house together, the three of us moving in quiet coordination, as if we were participating in something agreed upon, something inevitable. The drive to the office was shorter this time, less than 15 minutes, the silence inside the car heavier than before. Daniel attempted to speak once, something about traffic, but the words faded before they could take shape. Ashley remained focused, her attention fixed on what was ahead. When we arrived, the office building stood tall and neutral, its glass exterior reflecting a sky that gave nothing away. Inside, everything was orderly. Clean lines, muted colors, controlled voices. The kind of place where decisions are made quietly, but carry weight far beyond the room itself. We were greeted by a man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Mr. Halpern. His handshake was firm, professional, practiced. He looked at Ashley first, then Daniel, and finally at me, his expression polite but assessing. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "it is good to meet you." I nodded slightly. Likewise. We were led into a conference room where the documents had already been arranged across the table, each page aligned perfectly, each pen placed with intention. Ashley took her seat immediately, opening her folder and adding her copies to the stack as if reinforcing the structure already in place. Daniel sat beside her, his hands clasped, his posture rigid. I took my seat across from them, placing my purse carefully at my side. Mr. Halpern began explaining the documents, his voice steady, his words clear. He outlined the purpose, the process, the expected outcome. He spoke of support, of care, of transitions that were meant to benefit everyone involved. Ashley nodded at the appropriate moments, her confidence unwavering. Daniel remained silent, his gaze shifting occasionally toward me, as if still searching for something he could not name. I listened without interruption, allowing the explanation to unfold fully, because it was important that everything be said out loud, important that every assumption be placed clearly on the table. When Mr. Halpern finished, he slid the first document toward me. "If everything looks acceptable, you can sign here," he said, indicating the line with his pen. Ashley leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on me, anticipation carefully hidden beneath composure. Daniel held his breath, whether he realized it or not. I reached for the pen, my movements slow, deliberate, exactly as they expected. For a moment, I let the silence settle, just long enough to make the moment feel complete. Then I looked down at the document, not with uncertainty, but with clarity, because the truth was, this was not the moment they thought it was. This was not the end of anything. It was simply the point where everything they believed began to come undone. The pen felt heavier than it should have in my hand, not because of what it was, but because of what everyone in that room believed it represented. Ashley leaned forward slightly, her attention fixed on the line where my name was printed, her posture composed but unmistakably eager. Daniel sat beside her, his fingers interlocked, his shoulders tense in a way he probably did not even notice himself. Mr. Halpern remained still, professional, waiting. Everyone was waiting for the same thing. A simple signature. A quiet agreement. A conclusion they had already accepted as inevitable. I lowered the pen toward the paper, letting the tip hover just above the line, and for a brief moment, I allowed the silence to deepen. It is remarkable how much can be revealed in silence when people expect movement. Ashley shifted slightly in her chair, her composure tightening just enough to betray anticipation. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had been holding in for too long. I looked down at the document once more, then lifted my gaze, not toward Ashley, not toward Daniel, but toward Mr. Halpern. "Before I sign anything," I said calmly, "I would like to review one additional document." The room did not change all at once, but something in it shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Ashley blinked, just once, her expression remaining controlled, though the certainty beneath it flickered. "We have already gone through everything," she said gently. "There is nothing else you need to worry about." I turned my head slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time in a way that held rather than yielded. "This is not about worry," I replied, my voice even. "It is about completeness." I reached down beside my chair and opened my purse, retrieving the envelope I had placed there the day before. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, leaving no room for interpretation. I set the envelope on the table and slid the document out, unfolding it with the same care I had given it earlier. Mr. Halpern's attention sharpened immediately, his posture adjusting as his eyes moved across the page. Recognition does not announce itself loudly, but it does not hide either. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his tone no longer neutral. "My husband prepared it," I said simply. "Several years ago." Ashley's composure faltered then, just slightly, the edges of her confidence no longer as clean as before. "What is that?" she asked, her voice still controlled, but thinner now. I did not answer her directly. Instead, I slid the document across the table toward Mr. Halpern. He took it, scanning the contents more carefully this time, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to focused attention. The room grew quieter, not empty, but dense, as if every word spoken next would carry more weight than expected. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his gaze moving between the document and my face, uncertainty finally replacing the quiet compliance he had carried until now. Mr. Halpern cleared his throat softly. "This changes things," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. Ashley straightened in her chair, her hands clasping together, her control returning in form if not in certainty. "I am sure whatever that is, it does not affect the current arrangement," she replied. Mr. Halpern did not look at her when he answered. "It does." That was all he said, but it was enough. I folded my hands calmly in front of me, allowing the moment to settle without interruption. There was no need to explain further. The document spoke for itself, and more importantly, it spoke in a language they had not prepared for. Ashley's eyes moved quickly now, calculating, reassessing, searching for a way to restore the outcome she had already accepted. Daniel sat back slowly, the tension in his posture shifting into something else entirely, something closer to realization. I picked up the pen again, not to sign what had been placed before me, but simply to hold it, to remind them that the decision had never been as simple as they believed. "I think," I said quietly, "we should take another look at everything." And this time, no one rushed to disagree. No one spoke for several seconds after Mr. Halpern's words settled into the room, and in that silence, everything that had once felt certain began to shift. Ashley's posture remained upright, but there was a tension in the way her fingers pressed together now, a subtle tightening that revealed more than any reaction ever could. Daniel looked from the document to me again, but this time, he did not look away. There was something different in his expression, something closer to recognition than avoidance. Mr. Halpern placed both sets of documents side by side, his attention moving carefully between them, his voice measured when he finally spoke again. "This document establishes a separate layer of authority," he explained. "It outlines conditions under which control of assets and residence cannot be transferred without direct consent, regardless of secondary arrangements." He paused, then added, "In its current form, the paperwork you have prepared cannot override this." Ashley leaned forward slightly, her composure still intact, but no longer effortless. "There must be a way to proceed," she said, her tone controlled, deliberate. "We are acting in her best interest." Mr. Halpern did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at me, as if recognizing for the first time that I had not been a passive participant in this process. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "how would you like to proceed?" It was the first time anyone in that room had asked me that question. Not suggested, not guided, asked. I folded my hands calmly on the table, feeling the weight of the moment not as pressure, but as clarity. "I would like to make something very clear," I said quietly. I am not transitioning anywhere. I am not transferring control of my home, my finances, or my decisions. The words were not loud, but they did not need to be. They carried their own certainty. Ashley's expression shifted then, not dramatically, but enough to reveal that the outcome she had expected was no longer within reach. Margaret, she began, her voice softer now, more careful. We only wanted to help. I turned my head slightly, meeting her gaze with the same calm steadiness I had maintained from the beginning. Help is offered, I replied. It is not arranged without being asked. Daniel exhaled. Slowly, his shoulders lowering as if something he had been holding onto had finally loosened. He looked down at the table, then back at me, and for the first time since this began, he spoke without looking at Ashley first. Mom, he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. I did not know about all of this. I held his gaze for a moment, not with anger, not with accusation, but with understanding that did not excuse what had happened. You did not ask, I said simply. That was all it took. Mr. Halpern began gathering the documents, separating them with quiet precision. Given the circumstances, he said, I recommend that we pause all current proceedings until everything is properly reviewed under the correct authority. Ashley did not argue this time. She sat back slightly, her hands resting on the table, her confidence no longer driving the conversation. The structure she had built had not collapsed loudly. It had simply failed to hold. I placed the pen back on the table, exactly where it had been before, and stood up slowly. The room felt different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because the balance within it had shifted. Thank you for your time, I said to Mr. Halpern. He nodded respectfully. Of course. Daniel stood as well, hesitating for a moment before stepping closer to me. Ashley remained seated for a second longer, as if recalculating, then rose as well, her expression composed but distant. We walked out of the office together, the same three people who had entered, but not in the same positions. Outside, the air felt clearer, sharper, as if something that had been pressing quietly against everything had finally lifted. Daniel reached for the car door, then paused, turning toward me. What happens now? He asked. I looked at him for a moment, then past him, toward the open space beyond the parking lot, where nothing had been decided yet, and everything still could be. Now, I said calmly, we take our time. I stepped past him and into the sunlight, not waiting for agreement, not needing it. Because the truth was, they had believed this was the end of my place in their lives. They had believed I would leave quietly, without question, without resistance. But they had misunderstood something essential. I was never the one being removed. I was the one who had been watching. And now, I was the one deciding what stayed and what did not.